Hi, my name is Taryn Hillin. I was diagnosed with high-grade small cell neuroendocrine cancer way back in 2019. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone because most people haven't. I was diagnosed at stage 3C, and I will be coming up on my 5-year anniversary in October. And I also run the Anti-Cancer Life on TikTok and Instagram. I was actually moving to the south of France, and it was a lifelong dream of mine to move there. I had gotten my French visa. My husband and I had rented a house in Montpellier, and I was really excited for this new journey, and I wanted to get all of my doctor's appointments done before going. So I went to the OBGYN, and I was going to a new OBGYN because I had moved in Los Angeles. And she saw that I was bleeding. I had what's called a friable cervix. And so like cells were just kind of sloughing off. Now I hadn't noticed any of this. And she was like, we need to do an ultrasound. It took about a week to do the ultrasound, which was very frustrating. And then I was on a tight time schedule though, because I'm like, I'm leaving the country. I'm getting out of here. And she was like, okay, like, you know, we got to wait for the results, blah, blah, blah. I went back in about a week later and she walks in and she was like, why are you here? And then I'm like, I'm just getting those results. And then she said, oh, right. You have a tumor on the other side of your cervix, like in between. It was called your uterine cervix. And it's like kind of a uterine neoplasm, but it's also on a cervical neoplasm. And well, at the time, though, I should say they didn't know it was a neoplasm. It was just a tumor, right? They just saw a tumor. And so she was like, we need to do a biopsy. I was like, do I have cancer? Like I point blank asked that. And she said, no, like this isn't what cervical cancer looks like. This isn't what uterine cancer looks like. You were checked a year ago, which I was because I go every year. And she's like, cancer doesn't move that quickly. She was like, it's probably like, it could be a fibroid or like a cyst or any of these things that were basically not cancer. And she said the odds of you having cancer would be like winning the lottery. I just started freaking out. And I called up an old doctor who I had previously had the year prior. And I said, hey, I've got this tumor. Can you get me in? And he was able to perform all of these tests in office for me. And, you know, unfortunately at the end of that, he also said, I don't know what this is. And he's like, it's not really something I have seen before. And he's like, I did see you just, I think it was 14 months prior. And he was like, cancer doesn't usually form that quickly. So he's like, I'm not really sure, but there's no way to know until we do the biopsy. I remember calling my mom and saying, well, it's either nothing at all, or it's just the rarest thing they've ever seen. Like, I was like, it's one of those two options. And then about a week later, he did call me because I was blowing up his office, being like, I want the results. And I could tell from the moment he got on the phone, because they kind of start with the hi, and you can just tell they're about to like ruin your life. And what was interesting is like I put on my phone voice because I was like, hi, so great to hear from you. And he's like, so it turns out, well, he said, I'm so sorry. It turns out you have this really rare cancer and it has these things called neuroendocrine receptors. He was like, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have a radical hysterectomy to start. And a radical hysterectomy means you lose your uterus, your ovaries, your surrounding tissue, your fallopian tubes, your vaginal canal, like just anything that's basically in that pelvic region, they're taking out. And I didn't really understand the implications of that at the time because I didn't have children. And I also didn't understand that losing your ovaries means you no longer have estrogen and you'll go into menopause. And it was my mother who pointed that out because I was like, it's fine. We're going to do a surgery. It's great. And she's like, you're going to go into menopause. And that was like maybe the most devastating thing. And then I asked, oh, do I have to do chemo and radiation? And he's like, I'm going to wait until and let you talk to your oncologist. And what I didn't realize at the time is that they were kind of treating me with kid gloves. They knew more than they were telling me. And I think they were trying to be like, it's neuroendocrine. We're concerned. But once they were kind of trying to guide me one step at a time. Let's start with the surgery, then we'll get final pathology. I think they knew from the beginning I was going to get wrecked with treatment, but I think they were maybe a little bit nervous to tell me. Because, once I got my full diagnosis, I later learned I was going to be in chemo no matter what. Even if I was stage 1, I was going to be in chemo. So I feel like, and what was interesting is the first time I met with my surgical oncologist, she was like, I would love for you to walk downstairs to like nuclear imaging and all that kind of stuff. And I would love for you to just meet this radiation oncologist. And I would love for you to just meet this hematologist oncologist. She's like, she literally made phone calls. She like texted them and was like, can you meet with this patient right now? And I didn't realize what she was doing is she was lining everything up. So the moment they had to pull the trigger on treatment, she was so nervous about the timing that she was actually lining everything up without telling me and being like, just go meet him, just do a meet and greet. And I'm like, why am I in radiation? Why am I in hematology oncology? And it was just so that I was on their schedule, had the first appointment so that they could literally get to insurance, start filing, do it, putting all the ducks in a row. And then she put me on her operating table within like, I think 7 days or something. Like it was such a whirlwind. I ended up being diagnosed as stage 3C. So that's high-grade small cell neuroendocrine carcinoma, stage 3C. Just shy of stage 4, it had traveled to my lymph nodes. It was a very rapidly aggressive cancer. And the prognosis rate at the time with the data we had, because it is very rare, put the survival rates of past patients at my stage at 0 to 7%. So when you're looking at single digit survival rates on a very aggressive cancer, that's with surgery, chemo, radiation, that's with all the standard treatment. So that's like, we're giving you all the treatment we have and your prognosis rate is in the single digits. That is terrifying. So we caught it early. I had come from like a health journalism background. I knew how to kind of navigate PubMed and health journals and just email. I was comfortable emailing medical professionals and asking questions, but it's a really tough system and no one is keeping track of your case except for you. And I did pull the card a lot of like, this is a rare cancer. My odds of survival are 7%. And I would tell people on the phone, you're not going to be the person that puts me in that 93%. Like, are you willing to do that? And you kind of have to put them on the spot and fight for yourself. And I know that sounds a little like nutty, but a lot of mistakes get made. And I even did my first chemo cycle without a port. And nobody told me that I needed a port. So that's why you think you're going into this system that people are going to be like, oh, now we need to do this and now you need to do that. And I went in, my veins were burning. I was in tears. And these chemo cycles are like 8 hours long and it's for like 3 days in a row. And you're like, I just remember crying and I was screaming in pain. And I was like, is this really what it feels like? Are my veins on fire for 3 days? Is this really what I have to sit through? And they're like, we're so sorry. They're trying to do all these different things like heat packs, ice packs, like all that stuff. And then I remember walking into my oncologist's office because they check on you after. She's like, where's your port? And I'm like, is that something I can pick up at the store? And they're like, no, that's a surgery. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe someone should tell me that and schedule a surgery for me. Like that seemed crazy to me. And it's, and that's why it's so hard. Like it's so hard because you don't know what you don't know. And now I know a ton about cancer, which is why I try to help people navigate through the system. So I think what I try to teach people is like, don't be afraid to ask. There's no dumb questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions because you don't know what you don't know. Don't be afraid to push back against your doctor. It's not to vilify doctors. It's literally because doctors know so much. They're just like thinking 10 steps ahead of you. I did have a radical hysterectomy. Anyone who's had like a C-section probably understands what like to wake up from that. You just feel like your guts are falling out. And I woke up from the surgery and like my first word was pain, like pain, just give me something. You're in the hospital for like 5 days. It's horrible and miserable. And frankly, you just want to die. And you're like, this sucks. You feel like you'll never walk again. And then you have this task of try to recover from this huge abdominal. I have like a 6-inch scar across my stomach. It's a huge open, like 6-hour surgery. Try to recover from this big abdominal surgery as quickly as possible, because the quicker you recover, the quicker we can get you on chemo. So they were looking at like a 6 to 8 week recovery. And I think we were able to do it in like 5, I want to say. I think we started within 5 weeks. It was like, okay, you're good to go. And then because I was stage 3C, which like they were going to give me chemo regardless, I had to go on a chemo regimen. And then I was also going to do radiation. We knew it was going to be both chemo and radiation. And there was a debate at the time of, do you do chemo first and radiation after? Do you do them concurrently at the same time, which is rough? Or do you front load that or back load that? And so my hematologist oncologist made the decision of she wanted to start me on the chemo because it was a lot of chemo. It was like a lot of chemo. And it was, cisplatin is a pretty like rough drug. It was cisplatin etoposide. Cisplatin sucks balls. I don't know any other way to say it. You obviously like lose all your hair. I didn't care about losing my hair. Honestly, it was kind of freeing. I was like, I'm fighting this. This is my armor. Like that, to me, it felt like the uniform I was putting on to fight cancer. So I didn't wear a wig. I barely wore hats. It was a little cold because it was like Christmas time. So if I was going outside, maybe I would, but I kind of liked rocking the bald look. It felt cool. But yeah, you're nauseous, you feel awful, you feel tired. Everything kind of hurts. Like you get neuropathy, you start losing your hearing, which was really, my hearing kind of sucks now. You get like tinnitus because I think it kills all the little hairs in your inner ear too. And really the hardest thing was that like it really screwed up my immune system. So she wanted to get me through those chemo rounds before deciding about concurrent radiation. After 4, and it started out like, oh, you're going to do 4 rounds. And then it was like, actually, we're going to have you do 5 rounds. And then it was like, actually, we're going to have you do 6 rounds. The rounds kept just going up. They were like, if we can keep pumping more chemo into her, we're going to keep doing it. And so finally on rounds 5 and 6, they were like, let's do concurrent radiation. And anyone who's done concurrent chemo and radiation, my heart goes out to you as well, because I do think of this as like the dark time. My memory is horrible from this time. It's like my body is protecting me and blocked it out, because you are like, I can't even remember the order of events now either, because you're having to go to one hospital to get, because radiation's daily. So you're having to like go to one hospital to get radiation, and then you're having to like leave and go to another hospital to sit for this like 8-hour chemo infusion. And then you wake up and you do it all over again. So it's like these you're up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and you're just in treatment all day. Radiation makes you very tired. And I had pelvic radiation. So it was also destroying my bone marrow and destroying my immune system. So my immune system was just like plummeting from all the chemo and radiation. And it just felt like I was being dragged around Los Angeles. Like I was a zombie. My husband was dragging me around LA to go to all this treatment. I just slept a lot. And then in the middle of it, COVID broke out. So it was like, don't go to hospitals, don't be near sick people. And I'm like, I'm living in a hospital right now. And then also that meant people couldn't come with you to chemo anymore. People couldn't come with you to any of these appointments. So then I was like on my own and I was alone. It makes me want to cry, actually, like talking about it. I think like that was for sure the hardest. Like, sorry, you're already like going through something kind of terrible. And then I don't know, there's something nice about like having someone in your corner and just being there with you. Once all of that treatment was done, my radiation oncologist called and said, there's one more thing I want to do. Are you up for it? And I was like, sure. I'm like, we're here. I'm not dead. We were staring down this horrible prognosis rate. Let's try. She was like, I think this could improve the odds. And there's this thing called brachytherapy, which is internal radiation. They can do it in lots of parts of the body. They basically find a hole and they stick radiation in it. They can also like drill a hole, essentially. They can use a catheter, or they can use other ways to get in. And brachytherapy ended up being one of the most traumatic things I've ever been through. And no one prepared me for that, for how traumatic and painful it was going to be. And afterwards, because I was in tears, just like, how am I going to get through this? I looked it up, I researched it, and found a lot of like case reports and studies that had found that the patient experience for vaginal brachytherapy is atrocious and horrible and painful, and that women had felt like they were violated. And that is totally what it feels like. I was a health journalist, so I actually was writing about like sex and health, like, and being very open with the public, like long before I got cancer. And I think what's interesting about cancer is I think sex after cancer is something that people talk about the least. And I do think there's a lot of like suffering in silence. And especially with gynecological cancers, whether it's like ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, cervical cancer, anything that's kind of like, or even breast cancer too, because of the hormonal implications of breast cancer, a lot of women are put into, well, first of all, we should clarify chemotherapy can put you into menopause. I think chemotherapy and radiation can both put you into menopause if you have any kind of cancer. But then you can recover. Like there's a chance your fertility will come back, right? So there's always that chance of like it will come back. For people like me or anyone who maybe had ovarian cancer, if you lose your ovaries, you're put into surgical menopause. So you almost instantly, you like skip everything and you basically just go into post-menopause overnight because you have zero hormone. Like you don't have zero, you have other glands that will make like a little bit, but you're basically down to zero. So like if you were to look at my hormone levels on a blood test, you would think I was like a 70-year-old woman or something. And then on top of that, I had a very major surgery that took a third of my vaginal canal. And there's a ton of scar tissue. And then I had pelvic radiation. So like they took all that tissue that they had chopped up and then they basically like obliterated it with a laser, right? Like they radiated the crap out of it. And when you get done with, which by the way is why brachytherapy is so painful, because they're taking a tube and sticking it up there and it's very painful. But the sex thing was like, you talk to a lot of women who had cancer and like, especially in support groups. And I think a lot of them, like their sex lives suffer a lot. And my husband and I had very open communication, which I think is really key. You can't have anyone pushing you to go faster than you can go. It's a literal physical disability. And so I think the partners of women need to understand that it's not like a mental thing where you're like, oh, just relax. It's like, no, it's a physical disability. Like we have to repair this tissue and we have to re-stretch it and we have to like rebuild this thing that has been totally lost. And my husband was really great at that. And so we kind of made a commitment that like every weekend we were going to try. And most of them were not successful. Most of them ended in tears of like, we're never going to have sex again. And when I'm saying sex, I'm talking about penetrative sex. I know we can do all these other things. We did all the other things, but you want that like closeness that you had like whatever before cancer. And so we just kept trying, and you try all these different things and you read as many articles as you can and you look up as many studies as you can and you try to find ways to make it work. And I will say it does get better. I mean, we have had a complete 180, but I would say here's the depressing part. The first like 12 to 24 months was not that successful. And so it really made it feel like, is this a forever thing? Especially the first like 12 months. It's like, but we were consistent. This is why I tell people like, be consistent, keep trying, because you might not realize you're making progress. It's not going to feel like progress, but even if you're making progress by like a half a centimeter or something, that's going to add up over time. It's just really hard to see that in the beginning. Not everybody gets to be no evidence of disease. And I don't take that privilege lightly. It's also a hard place to be in, especially if you had I don't want to say especially, I mean, anyone who has cancer, regardless of which bucket you end up in, it's a hard bucket to be in. But it is really hard. Like I was in some groups with other women with my cancer, and there were so many postings about people passing away. I had to like block the group. And then I also made friends with some of those people, and then they passed away. Not only is it a reminder of how lucky you are and how devastating the disease can be, but there's a really like big guilt factor. And I almost feel like I'm going to cry right now, because yeah, I think when you get cancer, you ask, why me, right? Like, why me? Like, why did I deserve this? And then when you survive cancer, you also go, well, why me? Like, why did I saw them fighting? Like, because the thing is, I did a lot of things, right, to help myself beat cancer. And that's why I started the Anti-Cancer Life, is I basically wanted to take all this knowledge that I had and I wanted to give it to the lay public. A lot of like diet, exercise, supplements, complementary therapy, high dose IV vitamin C, mistletoe, acupuncture, like all these things, right? And so people are like, oh, you beat your cancer because you fought so hard. I agree with that. But I also saw women fighting. I saw them fighting. I saw them getting on every clinical trial they could. I saw them eating right and exercise. I saw them doing all of those things. And maybe it was like they took a different path. So they were doing different things, but they were doing things. They weren't just like sitting down and letting it happen. And so that's like, I think for me, that's really hard because I think I think for the like women we lost, I feel like we failed them somehow. And I don't know how oncologists handle that. But I even feel that way. Like I try to help a lot of people through social media. But sometimes I take breaks because I'm like, who am I to help them? Like, I don't know anything, you know, I know a lot, but I don't know as much as like a doctor. And you kind of feel like you can't, there's just no, I want to go save everybody. And it's just like, you don't have the ability to do that. And it makes me feel really guilty and horrible. And then you feel like you should somehow be like, paying penance for, I guess, surviving, you know? So there's a lot of time. So I do like struggle with a lot of feelings of that, of like, oh, you've been given your life back, especially now that I'm coming up on 5 years. It's like, you've been given your life back. And people look at me now and they're like, oh, you don't even look like you had cancer. Like, oh, are you fine now? Oh, great. Oh, it must have been fine. And then like, you don't want to be that person that's like, well, actually, it was really shitty. And I like almost died. And I definitely, everyone thought I was going to die. And everyone around me for the first 2 years, everybody thought, I mean, the median survival was 16 months. So for the first like 16 months, everyone's like, this girl is probably going to die. Like, you don't want to be that person that like brings that up and says that to them. So you go, yeah, I'm fine. Oh yeah, I had cancer. Yep. Did chemo, did all that stuff. Yep. Totally fine. You know, you're like, it's great. You know, and then they think that's weird too. And so you just don't know how to talk about it to people who didn't have cancer. I mean, if you get in a cancer support group, you feel great because everybody gets it. Everyone's like, oh, chemo was the worst, and can laugh about it and then cry about it the next second. Right. That's why support groups are so great. Now I only have to get a PET scan once a year, but that was the first like 2 years, was every 90 days, which was crazy. Now I'm able to do like once a year PET scans, and I'm able to do circulating tumor cell tests, which is a CTC that helps predict recurrence like 3 or 4 months early through a company called Signatera. And I'm not paid by them. I'm like, that's not a plug. That's just, here's some information. But they are great. And, yeah, so you still like, you feel like you're still in that world. And I would say now I feel less in that world because my scans have spaced out and because I'm a lot further out from cancer. But there's still, I know people who've gotten recurrence at year 6, even though for neuroendocrine, they say after year 3, it plummets a lot. I know people who've gotten it at year 6. I know people who got it at year 11, you know, and for breast cancer patients, breast cancer can come back 20, 30 years later. And I think for AYA, that just like hangs over your head. Like if you get diagnosed at 70, you're probably not worried about 20 or 30 years later, because you're like, I definitely probably won't be here at age 100 and I'm okay with that. But if you get diagnosed at 25, 20 years later, you're only 45. So you do care about that. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. And I like that for cancer patients because a lot of times you get inundated with a ton of information when you get diagnosed. People are like, drink this tea and like take this supplement and do this and ask your doctor this and do this and start exercising and like stop drinking and stop eating red meat and stop like, right, get rid of all the deli turkey. And I definitely tell people that stuff. But what I like to remind people is that like a little bit of change at a time will add up to big changes over time. So if you're completely overwhelmed and you're like, the only thing that is getting me through right now is my freaking glass of red wine on Saturday, Like, don't get rid of that. Don't feel the pressure. You know, you don't have to listen to everything everybody is saying, and make the changes that work for you and that you think give you the best fighting chance. Because also, you know, placebo effect is real. So if you think it's going to work, you know, it might work.